Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel where today we are doing a full review of Miles Morales' Spider-Man by Jason Reynolds. So I do generally keep my reviews to spoiler free. There will be a point at the end where I will talk in generalities about the ending. However, I will let you know when we get to that part, and I will give you a timestamp for where to jump to if you want to miss even talking very generally about the ending. But other than that, we will be spoiler free. So let's talk about the description of this book. This book is following Miles Morales, who is Spider-Man. Now, Miles is also attending a very prestigious high school in Brooklyn. He is there on scholarship because he is very poor and he is Afro-Latino, and he knows that this is his big opportunity to have a better life than what his parents have, and he is very aware of that opportunity. However, his spider sense is now on the fritz, and it is getting him in trouble at school. Which is of course very concerning because he does not want to lose his scholarship. And then there's other things that start happening that require the attention of Spider-Man. And the story goes from there. So let's just jump right in and talk about the characters. So I liked Miles. However, we didn't really get much development of him. So I liked what I got. It just really wasn't enough. When I walked away from this story, I realized that I really don't know who Miles is as a person. It really wasn't there, and which was very upsetting because I did like this guy, and so I really wanted to know him a little bit better. Miles has a best friend who I cannot pronounce their name correctly, but I think is Ganke? Gank? I don't know. But this is his best friend and roommate, and I found him to be incredibly annoying, and he would walk into a situation and do exactly what he could to make that situation more uncomfortable or awkward. And I think he did it because he thought it was funny, but it really irritated me. And ultimately, I just didn't really feel the chemistry between these Miles and this character, even though they're supposed to be best friends. I sat there and was just like, why are you best friends though? I don't understand. There is a love interest in this book who is very typical love interest, very bland. We did get to see Miles' parents, Jefferson and Rio. Rio is his mom, and I loved her, and I really wish we got more. Jefferson, I didn't love him as a person character, but I thought he was very believable. Jason Reynolds did a very good job writing a parent who is incredibly worried that his son is not going to be able to better himself, right? That is a huge concern for Jefferson, and I feel like we really got that across, Jason Reynolds got that across very, very well. So I didn't think that Jefferson and Rio were super in-depth characters, but they were very believable in what we got to know of them. The villain is a very caricature, evil McEvil kind of thing, which is actually okay because this is a superhero story, and you're just gonna get some of that when you have a superhero story, and I'm fine with it. So let's talk about the pacing. This was very slow in the beginning and almost whiplash fast at the end, which is not generally pacing that I like. I like it to be much more steady throughout. And part of my problem with it in this particular book is that there was stuff that happened that did not drive the plot forward. It was just kind of there. And so it felt slow for no particular reason. So I just did not appreciate that. The writing style. I think that Jason Reynolds has a very nice writing style in this. It was his sentences very easily flow into one another. It's very easy to read. I appreciated even the style of it. However, two things. One is that he stays surface level on basically anything. He doesn't go in depth on pretty much anything. But when he does give an explanation, they tend to be very good, very concise, clean explanations that give so much insight that I wish we had gone more in depth. And I really did marvel at some of these because they were good, and I wanted more of them, and we just didn't have very many, which was disappointing. The other thing that I do need to mention is that the dialogue is much closer to how people speak. So obviously every author has to decide what they're going to do. They can either write more like a transcription of how people speak, which people don't speak grammatically correct. So sometimes it is very difficult to understand intention and what they mean. Or they could have very clean grammar, very clear meaning that sounds very robotic. And usually authors are somewhere in between, right? But they tend towards clean grammar that's clear to understand. Jason Reynolds went a little bit more into this is getting closer to how people actually speak. Now, I mention this because people have opinions, capital O opinions, about how the characters speak in this book. So for me, it was a little bit harder to I am very, very grammar conscious. And so when I'm reading, at least, especially when I'm reading dialogue. And so I need it to be a little bit cleaner. And so I did have a harder time with this. And it felt like I couldn't easily get into the book because the dialogue was harder for me to understand. Some people hate the dialogue. Some people are like, I got used to it after a while. Some people like it. Some people love it. It's just kind of all over the place. I wanted to mention it because it's a dividing factor for this book. So with that, now let's get into the plot. And the plot is kind of a big thing to talk about. And I am going to split it up into two different sections because really there was a Miles Morales storyline and then there was a Spider-Man storyline, and they need to be talked about separately. So let's start with the Miles Morales storyline. And this is where Jason Reynolds really, really shined. I don't know grammar. As much as I love grammar, I don't always know. This is where he did, this is really what this book is about. So the Miles Morales storyline was really about what does it mean to be a poor Black kid going to a prestigious high school that is not as ethnically diverse, and you're doing this on scholarship. Like, what does that mean for you, and what do you have to deal with that? But also, additionally, what I really appreciate and what I think Jason Reynolds did an excellent job at is how do you balance the responsibilities of Spider-Man as a superhero and trying to help people and the community and do all of that with the needs of Miles Morales, the person who wants to better himself, especially when those two things are at odds. And that, because that's really what's happening. In the beginning of the book, his spider sense is on the fritz and it gets him into trouble at his school. And he's like, okay, what do I do? How do I be Spider-Man with these responsibilities? Do I have to ignore my needs as a person? And I think that this storyline was done amazingly well. It just was so good. I thought this is where some of those really insightful, good explanations came into play, because obviously there's any number of people who are going to read this book who may not understand what it means to be poor and what it means to be Afro-Latino or a Black kid, right? Like, if you don't know what it means, the fact that Miles got this opportunity and what it really means, that the fact that this is likely his only real opportunity, like, if you can't comprehend that, Jason Reynolds really does a good job of driving that home so that if you need that explanation, it's there. And if you don't need that explanation, you feel seen and you have a really good way to explain it to other people who don't understand. And so I think he did an excellent job at that. There was a side plot along with the Miles Morales side of things that I thought was a huge missed opportunity, and it had to do with Uncle Aaron and just generally family. Because, so we find Miles has certain feelings towards Uncle Aaron. Probably about 2/3 into the book, we find out maybe it's not as clear cut as Miles thinks it is. And then instead of really thinking, oh, like, maybe do I feel differently towards Aaron, or do I feel anything, like, nothing. There was no rumination. It was really just, oh, people are complicated. The end. And I thought that was a huge missed opportunity. We could have done so much more with that. But overall, I do think this look at what it means to be a Black superhero is incredibly important and incredibly well done. So let's talk about the superhero story now, the Spider-Man storyline. Okay, so most superhero stories will make allusions back to the origin story, and this is no exception. However, what we got of the origin story was not good. It was very shallow, underdeveloped, missing some really important parts, and ultimately ambiguous. So I ended up having a lot of questions. And I was somewhat annoyed because it's like, if you're going to do an origin story, fine. If you're going to talk about the origin, fine. Give me enough. Otherwise, don't talk about it, because we don't have to have it. So I was upset about that. This Spider-Man storyline is a crisis of faith storyline. So essentially, it's the my superhero identity is interfering with my secret identity, and I don't want to be a superhero anymore. I'm so tired of giving up what I want in my life for this superhero to do things for the community, right? And then usually how it happens, that there's the crisis of faith. They decide they don't want to be a superhero, so they hang up their suit. They end up getting called back in, and they take up the mantle again, and then they have a reaffirmation of their superhero identity, and this was bad. So basically, we came in as Miles was already kind of most of the way there to deciding he didn't want to be super Spider-Man anymore, and we didn't get we touched on some of the reasons, and so we could extrapolate and figure out his reasonings, but it really wasn't explicit. There wasn't a ton of time spent on it. He hung up the suit for not very long. He decided to go do it, and he became Spider-Man again. But there really wasn't a good reaffirmation of that superhero identity, and it felt it was lackluster. It just was not good. It felt like it was left open, and I really, really didn't like that. I didn't like the fact that this storyline kind of came out of nowhere in the last 50 to 75 pages. It was mostly focused on Miles Morales as Miles Morales and his storyline, and then the Spider-Man part of it kind of just came out of nowhere, and I was like, why? Why are we doing this? And then like I said, the villain is Evil McEvil, which is fine. You get over-the-top villains. That's just how it is with superhero stories. I'm good with that. But we did get the villain monologue, or the evil speech of evil, whichever you prefer. And it was very truncated, and it really didn't help me understand the motivations. All it did was say that this guy was a racist jerk, the end. And I was like, okay, but I know he was a racist jerk, but give me his motivations. Part of the evil speeches of evil is that they're supposed to be trying to help you see their perspective, right? And we just didn't get that. And so that was unfortunate. There were supernatural elements, which was fine, but it was not very well alluded to in the beginning, and then we got to the end, and there were multiple supernatural elements that interacted with no explanation, nothing, just out of nowhere. Again, it was just not great. And then okay, so this is where we're going to talk a little bit about the ending. Like I said, I will try to keep it very general as can be, but if you do not even want to risk it, timestamp here, jump ahead to that point, and then you will miss me even talking at all about the ending. So, Spider-Man basically kicks the supernatural butt of the villain, right? And that's great. The villain dies, and then he's got a horde of people that he's been controlling that are a bunch of racist jerks that he's been has been keeping motivated to be racist jerks at their various schools. Well, here's the thing, and Miles and his best friend surmise that to be controlled by this supernatural being, the people that were chosen had to have been at least partially racist, already had to kind of have that mindset. And they're like, well, maybe not. And then Miles enters his classroom, and it's very clear that this guy is just a racist jerk. And so Miles Morales has to stand up to him. My problem with this is that it means that Miles Morales like had to be the hero, but it meant that Spider-Man really didn't do anything. We had this storyline that was jammed in, and then it ultimately didn't matter that he kicked the butt of this supernatural guy, because Miles Morales could have protested this racist treatment regardless of whether the supernatural element had been taken care of or not. And so, and then like Spider-Man didn't try to like find all the other racist jerks that weren't at his school. And it was just, it didn't feel like a superhero ending. It was a terrible superhero ending that happened to be a very, very good ending for the Miles Morales storyline. And that's just kind of what that's really what it was. That like that ending ultimately was bad for the Spider-Man storyline, but it was excellent for the Miles Morales storyline. And so with that, I really feel like I don't think Jason Reynolds is a superhero fan. Not that I think he thinks it's bad or anything, but I don't think he really knows what makes a good superhero story. And so he didn't include those elements or do them very well. And so it was a great Miles Morales story, and I think that it suffered for having this Spider-Man storyline shoved in with it. Now, the other part that I think it suffered for is this felt very middle grade. Understandably so, because I believe Jason Reynolds tends to write for a younger audience than young adult. And so it felt very middle grade. It was very shallow on everything. We didn't dive deep into anything, even though there were a plethora of opportunities where we could have. And so ultimately, I think that this is an incredibly important story. I think it does some very, very good things. Just the exploration and the fact that being a black superhero is different than being a white superhero. We need that. We need that right now. And we need so much more than just this one. And so I do think it is incredibly important. However, it fell apart as the Spider-Man part of this story kind of fell apart, and I was ultimately disappointed by it. So I am going to keep this on my shelf, and I am going to reread it, because again, I do think that the Miles Morales it was so good. The Miles Morales part was so good that ultimately it is worth reading. However, it wasn't as good as it could be. So there you go. Let me know down below what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Have you read this? Are you interested in? Let me know. But that's it. So until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.